Welcome to Redwood Winery for another episode of What's That? Redwood Winery has a long history of producing a product called Amador Ice. It's a sweet dessert wine made from frozen Zinfandel grapes. Remember, it is in the Sierra foothills, and unfortunately it doesn't get cold enough in the wintertime to freeze grapes on the vine, so we have to take a different method. We pick the grapes somewhat later than normal, be sure that we have good high sugar content in the grapes to begin with, and then we freeze them. Picked into these bins, each bin holds a half ton, and then they're trucked to a cold storage warehouse in South Sacramento, and we leave them at 0 degrees Fahrenheit until the time where the crush has slacked off enough that we can use our equipment to press the grapes. Now, we're not going to crush these grapes. If you look carefully, you can see they're actually frozen solid. They're hard. You can see crystals of ice. And that's the whole secret to our making of the Amador Ice. What happens is when you freeze the grapes, the water freezes, and if you've ever left a can of soda in the freezer by accident, you'll know what happens. The water freezes as ice, and as the remaining water gets more concentrated with sugar, it eventually gets to the point where the freezer's not cold enough to really freeze it solid. And that's what we're getting here. We bring the grapes back out, break them up. It's basically one big grape sickle. So we have to use pry bars and crowbars to break these up. You can see we use those to knock them about. And then we're going to dump them into the press. We're not going to de-stem them. We don't really, in fact, the stems actually help us in this process because it leaves us some channels in the press for the juice to drain out. We always do about between 10 and 20 tons of it a year, and due to the size of our press, we're only able to do about 4 tons at a time. So it takes about a week to press these. The juice is held in a tank, cold, until we're ready to begin the fermentation. So right now, we've got the grapes. We're just going to start dumping them into the press, and then the press cycle runs for 24 hours. By the time the next bins have arrived, will arrive tomorrow morning, we'll have cleaned the press out from today's run. So right now, we're just going to wait, and when the crew gets here, we'll dump them into the press. Here we are, back at Redwood Winery, dumping Amador Ice frozen Zinfandel grapes into the press. You can hear how hard they are, almost like ball bearings. They roll in. Roll on right on out of the bin into the press. We've got four more bins to dump into the press, which will give us a total of about approximately 4 tons out of 8 bins that we started this morning. So, and the press cycle lasts 24 hours. It'll go through 2 cycles, and tomorrow morning we will dump these grapes out after they've pressed. And essentially what's happening is during the pressing cycle, all that frozen water stays in the press. And the concentrated juice, which started out at 24 or 25% sugar before we froze the grapes, is now more like 44 or 45% sugar. And that's the key. And when the fermentation is finished, we'll end up with wine that's about 10% alcohol and about 25% sugar. So just about as sweet as the grapes are when we normally would pick them for red or white wine. Here we have the Amador Ice juice. Now we can't call it ice wine because to do that we'd have to freeze the grapes on the vine, and as we know that we didn't do that. We took them to a refrigerated storage facility and froze them there. You can see the juice using red grape Zinfandel. The juice has a pink color. It's a little darker than the wine is because there's quite a bit of solid still in the juice. But you can see how thick it is. It's probably 45% residual sugar at this point in time. Very, very syrupy. Really difficult to ferment. Sorry about the noise. Yeast, which are the microorganisms that convert the sugar in the juice into alcohol, really struggle in this. In normal grape juice, they can just about finish a fermentation at about 25% sugar to a final alcohol of about 14%. This is really challenging for the yeast. They don't perform very well. We need a strain of yeast that's very robust. We use 2 different strains just to cover our bases, make sure that if one strain's having some problems, the other one will maybe help it out. Eventually, the fermentation just won't go any farther, and you end up with a wine that's 25% sugar and about 10% alcohol, and they just won't ferment any farther. You could bottle it without really filtering it, and it would probably not ferment either. Although we don't take any chances with that and sterile bottle all of the Amador Ice that we produce. We end up, the other thing that occurs when you're making these wines from frozen grapes is that the yield is very, very low. Remember, we've frozen a lot of the water, and that's the amount of sugar hasn't changed. It's just that we've reduced the amount of liquid, and so we've concentrated that. It's like boiling syrup on your stove at home. You start with a dilute solution, and if you boil it down, it's thicker. You haven't changed the amount of sugar, but you've driven off some of the water as steam. We're doing the opposite by freezing the water out of it. So we're only ending up, instead of 170 gallons per ton of grapes, we're ending up with more like 75 gallons per ton. So there's a lot of waste that goes on when the water gets thrown away. But the results are delicious. You can't believe how great this wine is. It's one of our most popular wines, and wine we've been historically known for. And I think we're the only people in the foothills, maybe in all of California, that make a Zinfandel ice-style wine.